So, as Dan mentioned, Paul's day job now is Director of Cooperative Development with an organization called the Alberta Canadian Cooperative Association. But I think as Dan said, I didn't realize when he first started working with you, he wasn't with ACCA yet. But I know he's fondly known actually as a cooperative development extraordinaire in certain areas of Alberta. Very, very passionate about it and has done it for a long time, including starting up a small electricity provider co-op that was instrumental in having established. And Paul now, and he spent a lot of time in BC before he moved to Alberta, has been really instrumental in trying to explain this concept. There's huge interest now, both in BC, of course, and in Saskatchewan, and to a certain extent in Manitoba, of what they've been doing. So both Dan and Paul have been really, really instrumental in sort of spreading the message. So I think that Paul's going to give us a bit more of an overview of just what they call the Unleashing Local Capital Initiative, which led to these opportunity development cooperative.
B12. Wrong place. Sorry, wrong meeting. But when I was younger, I spent a lot of time in bingo halls trying to raise money for the organizations I believed in to do something different, and lots of smoke and everything else. And we would get this money on a charity basis and try to make something happen. Meantime, billions in Alberta, billions of dollars leaving and going where, and making how much, in many cases not making anything at all. It's a pretty big thing. That Dan has talked about. We made a few comments. He's full of shit, you know that now. In terms of all the work that we've been doing around this, unleashing local capital, I come here standing on the shoulders of giants. People have done this before. Used to work with Mike Lewis and did a lot of the work with him, researching some of these models around local capital raising and some of these very same issues. So Mike deserves a big hand for that. Carol Murray, the BC Co-op Association, used to work in Alberta, and look where she gets still down there. Actually wrote the proposal and worked with us on some of the research as well too, looking at these models, taking a good look at the CDF model in Nova Scotia, what's happening there, how do we apply it. And so thanks to Carol for doing that. She actually got the money that came through that allowed me to work with Dan, which has been a pain. But
because that's everybody he loves.
yes,
So the art changes seating arrangements in the bus for the rest of the road.
Criticisms of endurance. So lots of work around that in terms of what's happening in Nova Scotia. It's been a long process for us going through it. A lot of it is about looking at what the systems are like. How do we create the environment and the process for this to work? We got very lucky. We already saw the gerbil analogy that Mike brought out, and Dan and his group in Sangudo have been kind of the gerbil we've been experimenting on, and we'll continue to experiment on for the next little while. And hopefully we all learn from it. Hopefully we don't kill it in the process as we come to the adherence. Maybe go to the next slide. So why are new investment models needed? You heard a lot about this already. Venture capitalists are not worried, don't give a rat's something about Sangudo. It's too small, those investments are way too small, location is way too small. It's just not something they're going to get into. Venture capitalists want a quick return on investment. Venture capital wants a quick return on investment and doesn't really concern itself with the other benefits that are coming out there. Our systems have become increasingly centralized, increasingly bureaucratized to some extent. They want much larger investments, and so local capital invariably gets sucked up because of the gravity of that. And so how do we reinsert the sense of local investment, create that local gravity for things to happen? And it's just too costly to raise traditional capital just because of the cost of doing a prospectus of any sort. The lowest we've seen is around $70,000. It can be up to several $100,000 to do an equity raise. What they did in Nova Scotia is a fantastic process around that. And as we've heard before, time and time again, young entrepreneurs have a very difficult time, particularly in rural areas, getting any kind of even debt financing. And the role that equity financing, and a lot of what we're doing in Alberta is equity financing, is significant around that, because even a bit of that could leverage some significant equity. Much of that is happening with the credit unions, by the way. And you've heard billions leaving BC every year, you know the numbers now, and so the money's made here, why are we putting it somewhere else? You know, instead of playing bingo, look at your local investment and get active with that one in your local community. Some great successful experiments. There was some small experiment on the left there in Sangudo. I don't know if you want to hear about that anymore. By the way, it is a fantastic thing, and clearly the big thing you've already recognized from having Dan here. Unleashing local capital is first about unleashing social capital. Unless you get the social capital right, the leadership right, nothing else will work. I think that will confirm in Nova Scotia. All the tools, mechanics, things we've done to reduce the cost, to make it simple and easy, will not work unless you get the right leaders on the table. I'm not sure how they did it with Dan at the lead of it. It'll go on and on. But part of that is getting some very good examples. In addition to the research we were doing with Mike and other colleagues around that, we had some great examples of local rural investment in Alberta that were fantastic in a sense. One is the bottom right here in Westlock Terminals. That was actually a terminal in Westlock, Alberta, 90 kilometers north of Edmonton. It used to be a co-op itself, as was most of agriculture in Canada at one point. Was eventually sold out, bought by Agricor at one point after several amalgamations. Agricor wanted to shut it down in Westlock because they had just spent several $1 million on a new terminal in Edmonton. And that got people a bit upset about that, and they tried to find a solution to it, tried to find a buyer and one would take it, rural area, not going to get venture capital in rural areas, it's hard. So they decided to form a co-op, the first new generation co-op in Alberta, and this was back 8 years ago, and they went through the process, got their prospectus done. It was fairly expensive to get it done, and all that work, and they went out and they needed to raise $1.2 million, and the guy who led it, and it's often, as Dan has mentioned, I'm going to be very clear about this. It's often 2 or 3 people that do 90% of the work, or take the risk. They put their social capital on the line in the community to make it work. And the best thing you can do if you're not those people is really support them. Okay, that's really crucial. Let's be honest. I'm sure it's the same thing with the Cedars as well too. And Dave Felstad was a guy who was a farmer a long time. He'd been on the Repo board actually at one point. And he led this process. And the day before they were finishing their investments, they only had about 60% of their minimum share offering that they needed. And if you don't get your minimum, you have to give the money back. And so he was worried. And so lo and behold, he was up all night. Lo and behold, the next day he went out to where the investment was taking place, and as you heard before, at the local community hall, there was a line for a block and a half of people trying to buy the shares. So they raised 1.4 million, looking for 1.2. Bought the terminal, turned it around. No bank would touch them. No bank, no investment group would touch them before this. It's risky. There's just like, if there's something in Edmonton, we're not going to. They're centralizing. This is the way of the world. They bought the place. It's 8 years now. They've paid 7% a year every year for the last 8 years. And last year they actually surpassed by 15% the grain handling capacity of the Agricor terminal in Edmonton. And so and of course they have no problem getting money at the best possible rates ever. So it's people to have the courage to see the vision and move it forth. So it's a fantastic experience. Drawing from that, up on the right is a railway. They tended to be disappearing. Now they're more suddenly interested again because of oil traffic. But of course in Alberta, like many places, rail lines are closing. CN, another large conglomerate, a large business, was also interested in that short line. And there was relatively small return on investment they were getting. They were going to shut it down. This was going to affect farmers. This is a rail line that's basically from Camrose kind of to the Saskatchewan border. It was going to be shut down because it wasn't enough return for them. This group of farmers got together, worked with Westlock, lots of sharing of ideas. And Ken Eschlieder in particular was certainly a character. Some guys should hear him rant. He worked with this. They got 370 people to invest. 350 people raised $3.7 million. Didn't get some debt financing, but they got that initial equity, which is very important. And bought the railway. These guys had never run a railway before. And now they've got the hats to prove it. So it's been 3 years now, and they are running the railway. They've got some fantastic people. A key thing with both of these is finding the right management capacity. They got the right people in. If you're ever going to do a business, make darn sure there's some capacity there. They got to have that. So it's been 3 years running. They're actually in their 6th year projected revenues. They bought their 3rd engine right now. They've actually just bought 2 tourism cars as well too. So they just started running those in the early spring, and we had a hell of a winter. And they were doing their first tour, and the beer cake froze. With all this experience, taking from that, what happened locally in the process, knowing what was going on in Nova Scotia, I was working with Spark, which is a renewable energy co-op retail renewable energy. And we worked with this process from Nova Scotia using the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, which is the trustee that we was used in CEDAS, which allows us to be carrying vehicles for self-directed RSVs. And so we worked with them, and Spark was the first one we did that. We sold out like that. Very easy to do. People are looking, there's a certain population that's looking for alternative, ethical, direct investments. And it's getting it right. It's surprising what it can be looked at. I want to go back to, we're getting demands all the time to invest in Spark. And if you go back actually to West Block Terminals, you walk into the boardroom, there's a list of people who want to buy shares. It's about 60, 65. And there's people who want to sell shares. It's the West Block Stock Exchange. But no one's going to sell shares. They're just too valuable. We're else going to get 7% every year. That's the numbers. And with Spark, we've been paying 6. We've got lineups for people to go to the next level. Next. Based on that experience with Sangudo, no matter how difficult it was to work with Dan, we decided to keep working together. We got some additional money from the Rural Alberta Development Fund, which was very supportive in that, to see how we could template this model and take what the experience has been and make it more accessible. A lot of what we've done is based on pretty outrageous lawyer fees. To bring things down, we actually went down and was able to spend some time with Chris and what's happened in Nova Scotia, met with Rankin and a few others. I won't try to imitate the accent. No, I will, actually. Rankin McSween. We went down to see Rankin. You know, Paul, we have a lot of affection for the Albertans. A lot of affection. Because all the money comes from there. But it is a different context, of course. Nova Scotia, even in Alberta compared to BC, because thanks to the great hard work of all our ancestors, we have lots of oil. So due to our hard work, we have oil, and we're benefiting from that hard work and going through that. But anyhow, we brought all these groups together. It was very important for us looking at this to see how we could expand this model. So not just one organization pushing this, but as many people as possible. This is a vital key tool, particularly for rural communities, to revitalize themselves. So we work with the Bathurst University, and they've helped quite a bit in terms of the process for evaluating and being the think tank, and they work quite strongly with the folks in Balta as well too. We developed a manual on the process. We've got online training tools. A lot of the videos are done by Dan. I'm not sure why we picked him. He's not very good at it. And it's all there and accessible. I used to make it accessible and feasible. A lot of money was spent on taking the complexity of the rules and regulations that are out there, finding the simple paths forward from the accounting and legal perspective, so people can get to the real work of investing locally. Okay? And that's what this whole process is about. And all our other partners, Community Futures played a huge role. Many of them led the projects. CDI is kind of the francophone association around that, the Alberta Renewable Development Network. The one I want to emphasize too is the Alberta Business Family Institute, because the key thing, half of our investments have been succession planning. In particular in rural areas, people getting older, dying, a root of them, and no businesses are leaving, and that's another hit to the community. Next slide. Crow's Nest. So yeah, with this whole process, we worked with several pilots. Sangudo is, of course, was the first one, and some of the work we did was to rework their corporation documents and processes. Crow's Nest here. This is some fantastic community meetings. You look at the bottom left there, just the passion that people have for what's going on in that community. There's one guy in particular, a young guy, he was probably 28 or something like that, and he came back and he stood up and said, talked to leaders and said, at last, someone's actually doing something. We've been waiting here in Crow's Nest. You've been through Crow's. It's a gorgeous place. No development, really at all. And at last, people are doing something. And at last, part of it was, and this is a very interesting phenomenon with this, it's not just about the money. The money's actually secondary. Sort of say that, but it is secondary to the actual action of the community. So with Crow's Nest passed, we started working with them on this pilot, and one of the big issues there is that there's no really good hotel in there. Believe me, there's no really good hotel in there. And they've been trying to get one for some time, but the issue is there's been a talk of twinning of the highway through there for the past 35 years. It's never happened. So no one wanted to take a chance on land development for a hotel because they weren't sure what was going to happen. This group got together after we started working with them as a pilot. They actually sat down with the transportation department and got a letter of comfort, basically saying the land that you have here will not be affected by the hotel. In fact, it may well be improved. Great, they've been waiting 35 years for that. Within 3 weeks, someone came up and scooped the deal. Okay? So someone, because they'd done all this work and made the motion for it, someone else came along and did the job. And yeah, you got upset, we got upset, they got upset. But that's happened in more than half of the projects we've worked with. The first investment idea is not taken up. We can shake our heads, but fantastic. There's actually activity happening inside. Good. That thing had been for sale for 2 years. They did some work, and by the way, but from deciding to do the meat shop to actual sale, it took us a month and a half. So they can be very quick. Someone else came to try to buy it. Same thing happened in Crow's Nest Pass. The hotel didn't happen, someone else came along, someone else came to grab it. They shifted gears and bought this heritage building downtown, renovated it, which had been sitting vacant for 2-3 years, and converted it, and now there's 3 businesses on the bottom floor, there's some new condos on the top floor, and they're now leasing it out for almost 3 times what they expected in their business plan. They're doing extremely well. So we're also working in Falaire, which is looking at a 55-plus housing piece. Vulcan, another thing happened. We did a lot of work on a bakery. Owners were shutting it down. They found an entrepreneur, started working on the deal. There was a problem with the committee. Someone almost died. But someone else came, the baker and the new entrepreneur went for the business. And there's now a new entrepreneur that business is going. They're going into a second investment now. Didsbury is looking at a cafe, and Athabasca is very interesting. They're probably approaching something like the blind pool process that you have already. Although we have some issues or concerns about the blind pool. We'll talk about that later. Next. This is not Alberta. This is actually the UK. So Dan and I had the privilege of heading down to the UK just a few weeks ago, actually. And rural Alberta is also very similar to rural BC, is very similar to rural England. Although there's a lot more sheep down there. So rural communities are getting hit all the time, again, by that centralization of services and process, that out-migration, the whole thing. Very same dynamic going on, even though in a tighter space. People were losing shops, they were losing their community pubs, which is a pretty central piece. If you've been to the UK or even Europe in general, pubs play a pretty central community role. In fact, if this was in the UK, there'd be beer here right now. And also the soccer as well too. It's become increasingly professionalized, and soccer is the next religion down there, of course. And so what's happened in the UK is just this proliferation of co-ops, different kind of co-ops. So it's the cooperative shops, pubs, and football clubs. So small rural retail, okay, retail shops for buying food are disappearing in small rural areas because of Costco's. Same thing's happening in the UK. In, I think it was 96, there was the first shop that they tried to work with that was trying to make it revitalize itself. They actually went out and they bought the shop using community share investments. Very similar to the models we have in Nova Scotia and here. There's now over 350 of them in England right now. And they do extremely well. I think there's only 26 that have failed. Something like that. Very, very small amount have failed in the last 5 years. And of course, the pubs are going up, some fantastic pubs, cooperatively owned, full of pride and process. And cooperative soccer clubs, again, because of the centralization process. We went to where was it again? Wimbledon, actually. It was a soccer club that was bought by Russian money, was taken out of the community, even though it's still called Wimbledon. And these local folks, 5,000, got together and started their own football club. Man, was that ever an experience to go hear the crowd and the pride and the connection people had with that community. So this process is happening everywhere in rural areas in response to what's happening with the centralization of services and the centralization of capital. So we're decentralizing that back to rural areas to make it happen. Sorry. So you've heard about this, you've seen it from Dan. It takes local leadership, like people like Dan, to make these things happen. And like folks like in Yvonne. It's patient, community-based financing, patient, which takes time. The returns are financial, but more than that, it's the community returns. And in fact, basing on what we saw in the UK, and what as Dan said in terms of kind of social conditioning, the process, your thinking process, the words you use are extremely important. And we call them opportunity development co-ops for a reason. We actually started calling them community investment funds, and we just had lots of discussions back and forth with the Securities Commission. Whenever we used the words fund, they would go. Because the regulations are there to protect us. To protect us primarily from fraud. And protects particular seniors from fraud. That's the bulk of the regulations that are out there to keep it above board and protect seniors from fraud. So that's one thing. So we move away from the word fund and talk much more about the opportunity development goal, a much more active and engaged role that the group has to take place using the co-op model. And that's the reason we use that term. Next slide. We've got kind of 7 steps we've worked out with this guide, and Dan was working with it, and some of Mike's previous colleagues helped us with this as well too, to kind of walk people through that process. There's 7 steps. The thing looks kind of like a snakes and ladders approach, because it's certainly like that. We start at one step, go back, start again, someone dies, keep going again, move through the process. It's never linear, but because they're all different. You've seen one opportunity development co-op, or you've seen one CDF, you've seen one CDF or one opportunity development co-op, because they're all different in the process. And so some of the steps, I'll go through these very quickly, just because you've heard a lot of it before in terms of identifying the needs, what's going to work. We spend a lot of time looking at retirement issues, succession planning, a great place to start. From our perspective, starting in Alberta, we've been very clear with the communities. We're nervous about the blind pools because you're not sure yet. Focus on bricks and mortar for your first one. These things are hard to do, they take some time. Be very safe and conscious with your first one. Get a good return, make it relatively small. Once you get that first one, it's hard enough. It's going to be a heck of a lot easier every year to reinvest until it becomes a habit, like it is in Cape Breton. It's a habit. People are calling ahead of time to sell at these shares. So ODCs are very different from what else is there in terms of other venture capital firms. It's about expertise and professionals, which you pay very high prices for, very short-term motivation. Same thing with brokers. They need that piece in the middle, which comes up. And this is about internalizing and bringing it back to the local community. So they're very thinking of local patient venture capital groups, local mutual funds that you've heard before. Next slide. So why the co-op model again? This goes back to our discussions with the Securities Commission. We've been asking them for all kinds of different exemptions, why they work. Look at the great work they've done in Nova Scotia. Look at these models. We should do this. And we should actually raise these exemptions to make it a bit easier, because these things are making a difference in rural communities. And the response was, well, if we do it for you as a co-op, we have to do it for everybody. And the response has continually been, well, co-ops are different. We're not like everybody. We're a little bit weird that way. Co-ops are inherently safer. The regulations are out there to protect consumers from fraud, for the most part. It's a good chunk of the regulation. But co-ops, interestingly, we found out have a difference. So we did some research recently on the number of cases of investment fraud out there in Canada and the US. Next slide. So number of cases of investment fraud using the corporate shareholder model in Canada and the US in the last 3 decades. How many were there? Thousands. Lots. Really, a whole bunch of them. Number of cases of investment fraud using the proper model across Canada, the US, even looking into the UK over the last 3 decades. Guess how many?
Sorry.
There goes the truck.
There goes the sun. 0.
I'm watching his hand.
Very expressive. I'm trying to make a point. It's time So, again, the regulations are there for a reason to protect us, because people are sometimes evil and they'll try to take advantage of each other. With a co-op model, one member, one vote, you can put in $100,000, I can put $10,000 or $5. It's all for the same community intent, it's still one vote each. People get eerie about that, but there's a reason it's safer. And it is safer. To the point, actually, if you look in other jurisdictions, next slide. Oh, this guy on the left here, this is the active trip in the UK, in the House of Lords Parliament buildings. It's all about me, so I'll put that up there. The guy on the left is Bill Wemkin. He's from Wisconsin, Minnesota, where co-ops have complete exemption from the Securities Commission. They can raise as much as they want without having to report to the Securities Commission. This makes Chris very nervous when I talk about this. But because there's no history of investment fraud. And I've seen their offering documents. There was an offering document for a hardware store that was going to expand. It was $3 million. It was 9 pages long. That's what it was. Because there's no fraud. And part of the reason is that Bill himself used to be the consumer protection advocate. And I want to ask you, have anybody ever been to the US here? Ever seen a Walmart commercial in the US? They'll do these big sales taking place across the continental US for Walmart sales, except in Wisconsin. Because this guy is responsible for keeping Walmart from dumping in Wisconsin. Okay? He saw the benefit of that and turned it around. That's one reason why Wisconsin has that ability to do that. In the UK where we were, with all these investments co-ops, or community share ownership in the co-ops down there, the government likes it there so much, they've now raised the exemption limit in the UK as of a month ago. This, despite the fact in the UK, the largest co-op down there just posted a $4 billion loss last year. Despite all this environment, they're seeing what's happening in local communities, how this is working. An individual investor can invest up to $200,000 in these share offerings, which aren't prospectus. So they have those exemption limits already. It's amazing what's happening there. Next slide. This is a purpose we use for opportunity development co-ops in terms of, again, if you can just read that if you want. It's the legalese. These are active, involved investments. They're not passive investments. Okay, and these are intended as legacy vehicles. We want it to be like the habit it is in Nova Scotia in some communities where every year people say, okay, what are we doing this year? Okay, the first investment will be hard, the second one will be easier, and then you'll be like, Peter, you'll have a grand old time. Next slide. We talked a lot about choosing the right investment, and again, this is kind of focused on the succession planning piece, because that's a big piece, I think, where there's the low-hanging fruit in the community. We've seen that again and again, so take a long look at that. I won't go through the questions, you guys look at this PowerPoint afterwards. Next slide. Again, so a lot of our time has been around the templates and the documents around this, all of the share offering documents and everything else. We at our partners within Unleashing Local Capital, we don't release those templates and processes until we met with the community, and there's some trust there, because if we have to trust them to kind of pass on this information. Once they have it, that's fine, and once they set up the first one, go to town, that's fantastic. But if someone else uses these documents and messes it up, then it messes it up for everyone. So we're quite clear on that. I've had calls from folks who've heard about this and wanted to use an ODC investment to start a timeshare co-op. It's not the kind of investments we want to be doing, so you have to watch how you put that through. Next. Okay, take a good look at the aftercare. That's one of the other modules. All these modules are back and forth. You've heard some of these before. Dan uses the word, I think he's called it communication. I'm not sure. So yeah, some of the same learnings around that. Next slide. Some other lessons learned. The importance of leadership group, huge. If that's not there, because people might love the business idea, whether it's an ice cream shop or advanced mechanics, whatever it takes, they will not put that money through unless they trust the people at the front. It is about, going back to the bingo analogy, one of the groups you find in terms of finding that leadership is quite interesting is Rotary Clubs. A group in Athabasca, for example, is being run by the Rotary Club. You go in there, these are business people who are used to giving to the community. They've got some great business acumen. This is blending the idea of risk capital and community giving. It's a kind of a bit of a new animal. And it seems the group, after a bit of explanation, you really seem to get it. So it's a great place to look at leadership and process if you're looking through this. Talked already about shift in investment focus. Again, you got the communities we work with have several business ideas, because there's a good chance the first one won't work out. Or it won't work out the first time, you might have to come back to it later. Crow's Nest Pass, our next investment is likely to be that hotel, because the offer that the other guy did to buy up the land is now gone, so they actually might get that business deal as well too. It'll be a lot easier for them to do it this time because they got a great first investment. In Alberta's case, 90% of investments are self-directed RSPs. The rest have been cash, and 85% of those have been transferring from existing RSPs. So sitting in a fund somewhere else and came back local. So it's kind of repatriated into the community. We found the end of February is a bit of a symbolic deadline, particularly in Alberta because it was transferred in, not new stuff. So it doesn't really matter as much. And I think it's a different case in Nova Scotia. There's the other tax implications, but we tried to do with one investment actually in Crow's Nest Pass, we tried to move it along quicker to get that deadline. And they only got 12 investments of the whole thing. The vast majority was from the broader community, which was transfers of existing RSPs. So in the context of the RSP stuff, that's a bit of an artificial deadline, although you do have to wait sometimes to get the investment in. Keep your chair offering short. You've heard about what's happened now by the grace and glory of the work of these folks in Cape Breton. They sell out within a month because people haven't had it. But you need that short timeline because you're going to get the lineups. You're going to get 60 to 70% of your money in the last 3 days, no matter when you do it. You can do it for a year, it's still going to be the last 3 days. Because people are playing bingo or doing whatever else. Otherwise occupied. So the first one is very hard. Accept that. Think of it as a workout. You're training for a long-term marathon. You want to build those muscles gradually. These are the local investment muscles, something that's atrophied. We sometimes call it barn raising in the 21st century because it is about gaining that kind of community connection. First one's going to be hard. You're going to be sore, but after that, it'll be a lot easier. And take a very close look at your economic development intermediaries. Look at what's happening again in Cape Breton. That's because of the great work of New Dawn taking that leadership. Here in Christina Lakes, you've got Sandy. Grace. You need that people to bring the people together and make it through. In Sangoon, it was more of their own pulling them up by their shoestrings, but those intermediaries can be very important, especially for the long-term success. Community Futures, in our case, has played a very important role and have partnered with us around that. Because of all this great experience, and one of the reasons we're here talking with Gordon is that, of course, there's been lots of requests for BC to come through. Sandy made some calls a while ago. We started talking with the small. We stood up with Sandy on some of their projects too. And so we're looking at expanding the model across the prairies, both Saskatchewan and here, and adapt to local conditions. So how's the DCC model here? And what we know, the CFA model, how does it work together? What's the hybrid here in BC? We're looking at integrated tax-free savings accounts, which would be a big boom as well too, and a lot easier to work with. And we're also looking at establishing a security deal to enable larger deals and cross-provincial stuff. And a big piece also, we're already working on this, is given the strong role that succession planning with existing businesses plays, how do we integrate ESOPs, employee share ownership, into that to ensure the long sustainability of that business. So those are some of the new phases in working with Gordon and others on that. And so that's where we're at. I think that's it.
Any questions for Paul?
The cooperative model isn't entirely a new model, and ironically, I grew up 40 miles from West Loch. In rural Alberta and in rural northeastern BC, in rural agricultural communities, the local federated co-op was a pillar of the community, right? Farm implements, farm equipment, even grocery stores, small shopping malls, and that kind of thing. How is that different? And unfortunately, a lot of that went by the way the dodo bird. How is that different from the concept that is here today?
People have died. Quite honestly, what you find with co-ops is by the second or third generation, the reason that the co-op got started, the need it was supposed to fill was filled, and it often goes on. You've seen some of the larger co-ops leave because of different business decisions and processes, and so it changes. So this is a bit of a rebirth. It's not, again, a co-op is a co-op. It's a distinct business, and it's kind of a rebirth. So what you're seeing happening with these ODCs, I think, is a rediscovery of that model. Same thing that's happening in the UK as well too. The large co-ops aren't doing so well because they become too corporate. They actually end up buying a bank with all these asset-backed derivatives and making stupid moves. But the small co-ops, there's a resurgence. And I think that's the same thing that's happening. We're finding that with people using the ODC model, Opportunity Development Co-op model, they're also looking at co-ops in different ways as well too for other needs. So it's quite interesting. It's kind of this virtuous circle of people refining how this can work in finding community.
I was just curious about the fellow you said, Ken from West Loch. What was his last name? Or if I wanted to hear him rap.
Just call Ken and he will go and go and go, and it's very entertaining. He's an actor as well too. Ken Eschpeter. In fact, we now have a meeting every year now, the gathering of Alberta co-ops, we call it, like the families. You know, we have turkey sometimes. And we have these meetings, and all the ODCs come together, and we start talking about you guys. And Ken's often there, and often as speakers, he's good. This year we're going to have a debate, just like the debaters on BC, between himself as an older co-operator and the younger co-operator as well too. So November 15th and 16th.
Oh, I've seen it actually.
Yeah, that's great. Other questions? I think we've tired them out.
Could be.
Thank you.
I'm going to give it to, oh, sorry, one more question.
And I'm not sure if it's a question for Paul or whomever. You had said make your first one like a brick and mortar type thing. Is that possible in BC, that you'll be able to buy real estate? So,
Invest in, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Paul.